Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here in the studio with the fabulous Pedro. I'm not even. Would you like to tell everybody your entire name, Pedro? Because I'm not going to try to attempt to do it myself. But thank you for joining me in the studio.
Thanks, Adelina. It's really good to be here. Yeah, there's a lot of L's and H's in my name. It's Pedro Gil Carvalho. Thank you for having me. It's super exciting. Yeah, let's get to it.
Brilliant. So we're talking today about transitioning from big tech engineering management to startup CTO. And I'm really the reason I chose this topic is because I think it was 4 months ago, sometime last year, you shared a post about this topic about the challenges you face when you go from a big corp to a small company doing your VP of engineering there, I believe. And I love that post and it inspired me to write a post of my own with a visual that I'm going to share during our chat today. But I wanted to explore it further with you, and I was delighted you accepted my invitation to go deeper into it.
Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me. And also, I'm glad that my post inspired you to write because I love the post that you wrote about it as well. Um, so we fed off each other
Thank
in that
you.
way. Yeah, it was a moment of reflection, and that's
Hmm.
that's how a lot of my content comes about. I'm just thinking
Sure.
about stuff, and there's a lot of stuff to think about every single day. And it's interesting because for me, having a big title in a very large company um, comes, of course, with a lot of scope and a lot of responsibility. And then going to a small company kind of sounds like it should be like a simpler job because it's
Uh
less
huh.
people and less, but in many ways it isn't. Just
No.
because the scope gets a lot bigger in other ways that you're not expecting. And so I wanted to see if there was other people thinking the same thing.
Nailed it. Well, so let's talk a bit more about was there, I know you were reflecting, but was there anything specific that made you want to write that post at that particular time? Was there a particular challenge you were facing that you feel able to share with us? Or, was there something um specific that made you want to kind of share this
Yeah.
this kind of a topic as you were and talk about it?
Yeah, I think it's about one of the things that makes life at a early stage startup exciting, which is that you get to do everything the way that you want in a way, but that means you
Mm.
have to do everything, right? Because nothing is there, nothing is in place for you, and that includes things like the everyday process, team structure, your operating procedures, how you hire people, how you promote people, all of those things. And there's a lot of things that are kind of invisible to you when you are
Mm.
in a more mature company that is already done for you. Yeah.
Yeah, so I wrote a few called for example, one of them was they're used to having a huge infrastructure supporting them. And that stems from anything from IT all the way to HR to project managers to product managers to various kind of to a support network. Was this kind of a big challenge from your experience? Because you were, please challenge me if I misunderstood or misremember, you were director of engineering and in a big corporation, about 15,000 people maybe, and now you are a VP of engineering, but I don't know the size of the startup.
Uh, yeah. So the startup is currently about 10 people.
Amazing. Wow, from 15,000 to 10, you have to really enlighten us. So, how what was the culture shock for you? What was let's concentrate on the chase here.
I think no surprises there. I think that a very large corporation, the culture is very much you are results driven in both environments, so there are similarities as well. But there's a lot of process, and there's a lot of ceremony, and there's a lot of stakeholder management and agreement, and there's a lot of orchestration that has to happen in a very big environment. Whereas in a much smaller company, um, uh, results come through quick and furious execution. So execution matters more than anything else. And
Mm.
and it's not so much about having a lot of ideas, but it's a lot about executing on them really quickly. So this get it done today kind of approach is the biggest difference, in my opinion.
And I'm not sure which. which pace do you prefer personally? Like, do you, and this is, I think, this is a very important point actually, because often people say they want to be a CTO, but they don't necessarily understand what the role involves, because the CTO role is very different depending on company size and stage of development. So would you find that I found a lot of corporate people actually struggled? They spent 5 years in startups and then they left back to a corporation because they couldn't cope with the lack of structure, with the flying by the seat of your pants type of culture. What's your preference? Did you realize that you quite love this kind of um, executing quickly, let's make stuff happen quickly, seeing results quickly, or would you quite like the slower pace of a corporate? What do you think?
Well, that's a really good question because I think that even in a large corporation, you still want to move fast. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like you don't want to; it's more like you kind of can't
Yeah,
by necessity of the structure of things and all the dependencies that you have.
yeah.
But I no matter where I am, I like a fast pace, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's not the difference. I think what drew me to a smaller startup was first wanting to be getting in early on a rocket ship. To be very honest, that was a very
Nice.
exciting feeling that I had before, and I wanted again.
Yeah.
Um, but it was also about having more ownership, like owning
Mm-hmm.
more of
Mm-hmm.
the puzzle instead of a smaller piece. But which one do I prefer? I think the goal is to bring the small startup to a more mature stage anyway. So I'm pretty comfortable
Sure.
doing that transition, and I'll be happy to get to that more mature state anyway. Yeah.
So, what would you say are the top three or top five challenges? Like, can we start breaking them down into more detail that you noticed as someone coming from a corporation moving to a startup? What would you say the five differences or challenges from your perspective?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge comes from the fact that a smaller startup doesn't have as much product market fit.
Mm,
It's still solving some fundamental problems. It's still answering some fundamental questions about why it exists, right?
yes. Yeah.
That's the biggest difference, and that means that you need to optimize for placing very quick bets about
Mm,
what you're doing in very quick succession, which might be unrelated. Whereas in a larger company, you know what you're for,
yes.
and it's about scaling that, amplifying that,
Yeah.
and that shift in mindset is a
Mm,
big challenge, I think.
mm. Sorry, my nose was actually very itchy right there. For real.
No worries, no worries. Yeah,
um, yeah, I
but
know
but
that's interesting. Yeah. Carry on,
but
carry on.
yeah, no, that means that for example, in a big company, you can say, let's get data from customers to
Mm-hmm.
inform our decisions because you have a
Mm,
lot of customers. In a very small
sure.
startup, you're trying
And
to
you can
get
see
those first.
patterns.
Yes, you can do pattern matching, you can get feedback, you can act on that. Whereas in a very small startup, the sample size is so small that the way you make decisions is very different. And if you come into a very small startup and you say, no, no, we're not going to do anything until we have data, you're not going to move.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. That's an excellent point. Just to clarify, by the way, to the audience, my 5 points about 5 reasons why big tech engineering leaders may struggle as a startup CTOs, they are not necessarily Pedro's points. These are just some points that I noticed. Just to clarify, so it's really nice to have Pedro's points being quite different than some of the points that I've mentioned there, which is brilliant. So thank you for that. Obviously, we have a brilliant comment from Nick Mellis. You know, with great power comes great responsibility. Excellent acknowledgement there, Nick. Thanks for that. That's absolutely spot on. And I think sometimes people want the title and the status, but don't necessarily want the responsibility. And that's not someone who's cut out for a CTO, are they? But anyway, that's another conversation we can have. So one key thing was about the fact that you're moving fast, but also it sounds like there's a lot more intuition based decisions rather than data based decisions that have to happen in a startup. Excellent, brilliant point. What else would you say was quite different for you going, from a big corporation to a startup?
Yeah, I think just expanding on something I said in the beginning that nothing is in place. There's really nothing in place. So you might come and find a small team that has been hired already, but how do they work?
Hmm.
What are their ways of working? Are they compatible, especially with remote teams where
Yeah.
it's really, really important that everybody works in a way that is not the same, but is compatible?
Yeah.
So that might not be in place. How do you hire? How do you promote people? How do you evaluate performance? All of these things that sometimes we can get annoyed at our partners in HR because they're a little bit like, here's your promotion
Yeah.
process. And you're like, no, I know better. But when that doesn't exist at all,
Yes. It's like,
you suddenly value your HR partners a lot more for the work that they did for you for the foundation, you know. So
ah.
there's nothing to improve upon. You have to build it all from scratch.
What an excellent point. And that fits in with my point number one. They're used to having a huge infrastructure support team, and yeah, have HR, IT, etc. In fact, one CTO said to me he was a bit blown away. He's super, super geeky, super kind of like deep tech type CTO, and he was like blown away that the board expected him to be the IT guy as well.
Oh yeah,
Almost offended.
yeah.
That's that was quite interesting. Excellent. Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? In a startup, you're literally designing the organization. You are growing it from scratch. So that's, yeah, no, that's really really interesting. What else would you say would be kind of some of the differences that you noticed between the two?
Yeah, so especially these days with founder mode, I find that, and this is not specific to the startup that I'm in. This is something that I observe. There are no professional product managers anywhere. When you're really small, and
Yeah.
all of those annoying things that they bring, like the sprints and the ceremonies and all of those things, they're not there, and turns out they're important. turns out
Who
turns out
knew?
that stuff Yeah, turns out that stuff matters. Not so much having a specific cadence or type of ceremonies or anything like that, but it matters to have a process
Mm,
that allows everybody to understand what's expected of them and when, and kind of how you engage with the work and with delivering that work. So that it's just basically a bunch of engineers trying to figure out how to do the work, and turns out that working together is not as easy as working alone. So how do we
mm,
justify the work that's there? For example, how do we know that the work is successful? How do we measure success? Those things are typically not there, or they're very rudimentary, and it is your job to make those things better. And again, there's no one else that you can blame for having a bad process. It's like, this is on you now. You're responsible, and
but
that's good. I like that. It's just
yeah.
a difference.
I have a question for you. So, I've had this feedback from CEOs of startups many, many times now, where they hired someone from a corporation who started creating processes for their 10, 15 people company. And very shortly after, they fired them because they
Mm,
felt
yeah.
that it was bringing operational bureaucracy far too soon. What do you think about that?
There's a quote by somebody that I would love to be able to attribute, but it's something like, have a process. Process is like eating. You have to have food, but not a lot of it, and mostly vegetables. I think that's kind of the quote. I think that applies to process. Like, you have to have one, even if the process is just get together with an engineer, talk for a little bit, go away, code results. That's still a process.
Hmm.
But you need to have a process that is the minimum amount that solves specific issues that you have. And I find
Mm,
that at very early stage companies, because you don't have that professional product management, you
yeah.
also don't have that professional communication of expectations and requirements. So there should be something in there that says, all right, before we do work, we need to understand what and why and who, for example. Something very
Yeah.
minimal like that.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, it's just a bunch of coding aimlessly. And yeah. So
Spot
as
on.
little as
Absolutely
possible, but
spot
some.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is little to no expectation setting or goal setting or any of that stuff, good stuff. You said something really important, a process to solve a problem. This is the thing. The CEOs who fired their CTOs and VPs of engineering for corporates that I worked with, were not impressed because there was process for the sake of process, because that's what made the person feel safe, because when they were in a corporation, that's what they were used to. But actually, the company doesn't need it at this stage. And this is why, quite frankly, the CEO felt that this was top heavy for no reason whatsoever. We have a brilliant question from Nick. What's your view on having a formal product function in place early on? Excellent question, Nick. Love it. Love it. Love it.
Depends on. I think the question is how early. I also wouldn't necessarily bring in a product manager to a 10-person company. I think an early stage company is going to have founders who are clear enough in their vision and engineering people who are organized enough to function. And I think that having a formal product function should come maybe at a later stage. I would say formal product function maybe when you get some level of product market fit. While you're still struggling through the pre-seed stage and even some of the seed stage, you probably don't want to or don't have to
Mm.
introduce that that layer. It's my opinion.
Excellent. And we have a question now from Gavin. Says, do you feel like you're alone, and how do you handle the stress that brings? Very good question.
So yes and no. Because I work really close in this situation, you're going to work really closely with the founders. In terms of in those terms, your first team is very close to you. It's the founders; they're experiencing similar things, and you can definitely support each other. You will be alone in the sense that you are the only one who is responsible for these kinds of things. You don't have another director of engineering, another VP of engineering who is your peer functionally to give you that peer level support. So
Mm.
yes, you're alone. How do you handle that stress? Thankfully, I have a great support network. I have a lot of friends in similar positions, and we talk, and that helps a lot.
Ah, very interesting. We have a comment from Jay Alfie. Jay used to be, I think, please challenge me if I misremember Jay, but he was director at the Center of Excellence of Engineering at ARM. But I didn't meet Jay when I was working at ARM. We met through a different network, but it's lovely to see you online, Jay. If you hire someone to create process full time, they will keep busy creating process. I love it. Spot on. What do you think, Pedro?
Uh, I agree, just because of incentives. I mean, if somebody's job is to work on the process, then their incentive is to continue to work on the process, whether or not that's necessary. Which is why I think that this kind of function is important, but maybe in a larger company where they kind of go from area to area, trying to improve it a little bit at a time. If you bring in a professional process creator too early, then you're probably going to have a little bit of overhead there.
Yeah, yeah. So, in my experience of seeing people from corporates who've moved on to startups, one of the things that they sometimes struggle with is the fundraising side, in that they're not used to having to make a pitch or contribute to a pitch for investment, especially to one in a company there's no brand recognition. A lot of them are used to operating for an already known brand, when someone else created the PMF and someone else created this massive network and this massive thousands of staff. And if they move to a startup, they kind of feel a bit out of their depth. They might feel like they're not really sure what on earth they need to be putting in this pitch, from an engineering perspective. Is that your experience as well? Is that something you've observed as well, or is it just kind of stuff that I've seen?
So I I think so. I think this. Let me put it this way. Contributing to investor relations, of course, is very important when you're at this early stage. Almost everybody's doing that in some capacity, especially an engineering lead.
Yeah.
I think what's challenging there is that we have to almost forget about the technology when we're doing that, because unless your company really is innovating at the technological level, like doing something nobody else has done, your tech stack is probably not your key differentiator,
a hundred
right?
percent.
So you just have to just remember what are the goals that you have, what's the problem you're solving, and focus on that. Like how are we making this better? How are we
Mm,
achieving these goals, and frame it from that angle, which is can be difficult for many tech leaders.
It is one of the most challenging. I almost feel like they're forced to give up their expertise if they think about the business rather than the technology. And the thing is that you're not giving up one for the other. You're just meshing them together. And that's in my experience. I mean, I worked on hundreds of pitches from Cambridge University when they were fundraising for cutting edge technology stuff that, I remember I worked once on graphene, on a pitch for graphene. This was 13 years ago. People hadn't even heard about graphene. It was just a new material that was invented. And they were really struggling to pitch it because how do you pitch graphene? How do you pitch plastic? Let's say if plastic was invented today, which frankly I hope it wasn't invented because it's not a good thing. But anyway, but how do you pitch a new material? And we came up with a brilliant pitch for that, but you could see that the technical person was really quite struggling to get their head around how do you explain graphene other than going into the molecules and types of all of the scientific, the material science side of it rather than the business side of it. So it's quite interesting to observe. We have about 9 minutes left of this call. So I was wondering if you were to give some advice to someone who um, perhaps was considering shifting from their corporate job as director of engineering to a startup, being a VP or CTO in a startup. What advice would you give them, having made that kind of shift yourself? Let's have some kind of warning signs or practical tips to help them nail it, rather than feel that it was a bit of a difficult learning experience and then go back to corporate in a few years.
Yeah, that is a really good question. My The way that I look at this, it is a risk that you're taking in your career. Let's say if you're switching from managing 50 people to managing five, and you're managing other managers, and then you have to code yourself actual features, not just in a
Hmm.
supporting way. It is a risk because that if you want to go back to corporate, that might not apply so well to that new corporate job you're looking for. So you kind of miss losing a little bit of time in your career. That's a big risk. So the way that I look at this, I think that you need to get as much signal as possible before you move. Um, I think a rule of thumb is if you wouldn't invest your own money into this early stage venture, you probably don't want to join it because you are investing your own money. There's a huge
Yes.
opportunity cost to this.
Yes.
That's my main tip.
Yeah, yeah, spot on. It's interesting actually because I was talking actually to someone like Jay. He was please challenge me if I'm wrong, Jay. But from my memory, 20-25 years ago, Jay was an engineer, and then became a kind of management director type in a big corporation like Arm, and he he was looking for all these CTO jobs, and it's I think I wrote a post about this some months ago. When I had a chat with him that they're asking a CTO to code, and Jay says, well, maybe you code as a hobby or something, but you don't really do it as a career anymore because you transitioned, to that management exec thinking rather than figuring out how to put production code together, and I think a it's really important to perhaps join a startup when they're growing and they need someone to help them understand how to operate in a more structured way, like a corporation, rather than maybe joining from scratch, which is what I think it could be quite dangerous, like you say as well. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. And again, it comes down to the fundamental difference between the two types of role. But it can also be highly contextual because there are levels of this. I mean, like if you're joining a really, really early stage company that has two developers, you're probably going to have to code yourself. The founders are probably coding too. And you need to expect that. And you shouldn't do it if you don't feel comfortable with your level of coding.
Yeah.
I personally like coding. I code a lot in my free time. I love knowing what's going on and understanding the system. And I love picking up small tasks here and there so that I can engage with engineers on a much more level uh, ground. But if you're picking up a team of 10, you probably don't want to be coding because that team probably needs to grow, and that's where you should be focusing your energy. Anyway, yeah, the main thing is you need to be very aware of what is needed from you, and needed is different from expected because
Excellent.
that's
Carry on, carry on. That's a brilliant point.
I
Yeah.
think that's another thing. What the existing members of an early stage startup think that they need from you in this role might be different from what the company needs you to do. So another tip is when you're talking to people about joining, you have to be really careful about understanding the context as much as
Hmm.
possible.
Hmm.
And it's like talking to customers in a way. They can tell you they want a faster horse, but they really need a car kind of
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's tricky.
Yeah. No, that's spot on. And I think sometimes people, especially when you maybe come from a corporate, it might be good to be aware so that you don't dilute your career brand. And what I mean by that, from my perspective, I've seen this a few times now, is that let's say you started in let's say you started in battery manufacturing as a CTO or as a director of engineering or whatever, and you worked for big companies that were manufacturing batteries. And all of a sudden you're joining, let's say a Cambridge University or Oxford University spin out that's creating a new type of battery. And they've asked you to join them because they've grown now to 10, 15 engineers and their technical co-founder is struggling. It's really important to figure out if you are going to keep that brand of working in batteries or in that kind of industry, or if you're switching industries because this could be a slippery slope towards other industries as well. If, for example, that doesn't work out, and making sure that they have enough money to pay you for a good while. Um, because I've seen this where people hop, they have an expertise to begin with, let's say in battery manufacturing industry, and then they hop to a startup that does that, but that startup fails quite quickly, and then they take any job they can because there's nothing else available in battery manufacturing. There's no big industry, let's say, where they're based, and then now they're doing working in fintech as an engineering director or in medtech or whatever. And after 5 jobs like that, in a tough job market, they struggle to find a job because there is no niche, there is no specialist industry. And what CEOs value the most, especially in a tough job market, is, do you understand my industry? Can you hit the ground running? And when you don't have industry and market experience, it's really hard to differentiate. But anyway, I spoke more about that in the webinar on how to get a CTO role in a tough market. But that's a pattern I've noticed as well. When you switch, from corporate to startups as well, can really mess up your career.
I agree. I agree. I think branding, positioning, and niche are very important things. And to be honest, I haven't really been the most strategic people with my career all the time either.
Don't
You
worry,
know,
most people aren't.
most people aren't. Yeah. What I would say is, I think that as like in the kind of job that I do here, so TerraMate is we do orchestration for Terraform and OpenTofu. It's a very infrastructure heavy. It definitely my role, my job, what I have to do is get a is create and foster a high performance engineering group. So in theory, I don't need a lot of Terraform knowledge to be able to
Hmm.
achieve that.
Hmm.
But my past experience as a head of platform engineering at HelloFresh back in the day definitely comes in handy every day. So I would say that it can be easy to think I'm just a programmer, I'm just a manager. These are abstract things that can
Exactly.
apply anywhere. But I would agree that it does matter to get that extra. To go from good to great, you do need domain knowledge, for sure.
Excellent. Excellent. Brilliant. Absolutely fantastic point. Pedro, thank you so much for joining me today. A few kind of a little quick summary of our chat. Can we go through like top 3 points of the differences between going from engineering management in big tech to an exec in a startup? One key thing is that you realize you have to create everything from scratch, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to tell me another one from our conversation? Do we summarize it for people?
Yeah, so there's no support infrastructure around you, right? So which is kind of related to that one.
Yeah.
Just
Process for the sake of
the
process is no good.
process for the sake of process is no good, and execution matters more than planning, honestly.
Yeah. And a bonus piece of advice for your own career, really think, would you invest your own money in this company? Like you said earlier. So brilliant.
Yeah.
Pedro, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you.
Loved having you. I'm sure the audience liked your points as well. And well, I wish you and everyone else watching Happy New Year. And thank you once again for debating this interesting topic with me.
Thank you, Adelina, and thank you everyone who was here today.
And anyone who wants to hear about exclusive articles from me, I've put a link to my interest list for exec CTO mindset. Folks who want to hear, who want to read exclusive articles, exclusive videos I might make, please join that list, and I'll